Especially living in such a rural state, I thought to myself, oh, I can outsmart these hick cops, so to speak, for lack of better terms,
They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm the smartest woman alive. I can get away with this.
Yeah. In this episode, you'll get to know Shelley Winner, the fearless justice advocate, and you'll hear the story of how she overcame being addicted and incarcerated to becoming a #1 B2B sales executive for Microsoft. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is my Success Show. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Show. This is where I speak to some of the most successful people I've met in my life's journey. And I'm on a hunt, I'm on a mission to find universal principles of success to help both you and my family. In case it's your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. With this show, I was looking to do something a little different. I was looking to create something lasting that would help my family succeed, and I thought you'd also enjoy learning along with them. I interview people who have achieved multifaceted success in many areas of their lives, not just career or financial success, because I want to find people who will teach how to be balanced along with all of that financial and career success that they have. I'd like you to do one thing as you listen to today's episode. This is something for you, not for me. As you listen to the episode, look for something you can do, an action you can take today or this week to make my guest's success story a part of your success story. And you're really going to want to make Shelley Winner's story a part of your story. I met her at a prison event where we were helping people prepare to talk about their past experience and build business plans. And I heard about her experience and I was blown away and thought, this is a perfect story for this show. So Shelley Winner is a formerly incarcerated restorative justice advocate who educates the public on the benefits of hiring people with criminal records. Shelley has been a #1 surface sales executive at Microsoft, where she won one of their most prestigious awards, Gold Club. Shelley is very active in the restorative justice movement. She's given a TEDx talk on hiring the formerly incarcerated and was featured in a PBS special called Searching for Justice. She's also the founder of Winner's Circle, a rehabilitative and vocational training program provided in prisons. Shelley, I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to be a participant on this show. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I knew when I met you, we were doing an event helping people in prison, and I heard about your story, and I thought, Shelley is absolutely someone I want to interview because of not only what you've accomplished, but the path that it took to get to that place that you could accomplish those things.
Yeah, it's been a wild and crazy journey.
Yeah. So let's start where I start with most guests, which is I ask what they wanted to be when they grew up. But I understand that where you were, particularly in your teenage years, was a very difficult place. So can you paint a picture of what it was like for you in your teenage years?
Yes. So my teenage years, my father was in and out of prison for alcohol and drugs. And I lived with him for a brief period when I was a freshman in high school. And he told me the one rule of the house was that if I wanted to do hard drugs, that I had to bring them home and do them with him. So
some family bonding.
Yeah, exactly. And then my mom, she wasn't very present. She would really try to just pawn us off at our aunt's house where we basically raised ourselves. She was actually our great aunt, so she was quite older. And I guess her addiction was her boyfriends. That's who she wanted to spend her time with. And so didn't really have positive role models growing up.
Yeah. And would you say that at an early age you had already developed an addiction, or was that something that came along later?
I started experimenting with drugs at the age of 13. That was the first time I smoked weed, and I gravitated towards people who I was familiar with, people like my father, the people who were, into using drugs and partying. And so I started smoking weed. Then at the age of 17, I first tried methamphetamine. Then as I got older, cocaine and heroin eventually.
Oh my goodness. And what did that do to color your feeling about what the future would be like for you? What did you think your prospects would be going into the future?
I didn't think that I would have a future, at least a bright future. I figured I would always be addicted to drugs. I knew how strong my addiction was at one point, and I thought there's no way I could ever quit.
Mm.
I enjoy this too much, and the thought of ever being sober was not even a possibility, much less, having a successful career, that didn't even cross my mind.
Okay, so we've kind of got an idea of what it was like when you were 18. Where did you go after that? What led to the path of you eventually being incarcerated?
Well, my addiction was really the main reason for my incarceration. At first I was just using drugs. I wasn't selling, but eventually I started selling drugs to support my habit. And then once I got a taste of making that money, easy money, then there was no going back at that point. So that's what ultimately led to my arrest. Now, I had been arrested prior for smaller things. Like I got arrested for an under the influence once. I was arrested for minor things, but this last arrest, when I was arrested for selling drugs, I was arrested for actually trafficking drugs.
Which means what? That it was going over state lines, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I was bringing it across state lines. So I was living in a very rural state, North Dakota, and was bringing drugs across state lines because I couldn't find anything out there in the middle of nowhere. It's funny because I moved out there actually to try to get sober. And I had been sober, I think, for, I don't know, a couple of months. And I moved out there, started bartending. And the first night I get there, my coworker pulls out a pipe, said, "Hey, you want to get high?" I was like, what?
Yeah, that didn't work as an escape plan for you.
Yeah.
So I want to talk just for a moment about the selling aspect, because I think one of the things that shocks people or is interesting to people when I talk about how I've worked with people who have been in prison, have been incarcerated, is the idea that you have a transferable set of skills. And I know that's a big part of your advocacy right now.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be effective at sales in order to sell drugs.
Correct.
You have to be effective at sourcing and management and marketing and all of these things that are entrepreneurial skills. So we're not saying that dealing drugs is a positive.
Right.
I want to be really clear about that. Yet there were skills that you developed, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you give us an example without glorifying it or making it sound good, but can you give an example of a skill that you learned during that time that is still transferable to the work that you currently do with Microsoft?
So I'd say like marketing. When I would get my shipment, I would piece it all out, get it ready to sell. And then I would start calling everybody I knew and asking them if they needed anything. And then I was actually hiring people to help me sell.
Mm. So you're HR director too.
Yeah, exactly. So I had people under me who were selling and I had to manage all of that,
Yeah. And again, I want to emphasize that was not a good thing.
No.
And you damaged a lot of lives with that. But what we have to do, I think, and I know that you're a big advocate, we have to look for a way to show a path to people who have made bad choices in the past.
Right.
To show that they can take those skills and reapply them in a good way.
Absolutely.
And it seems like that's something that you've ultimately done.
Yeah.
With your career and your advocacy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we are all connected, whether we think so or not. We are all connected. And if somebody in our community, if we oppress them or consider them a second class citizen, it does affect all of us at the end of the day. Like it really, truly does, not just that person. Because if you think about it, if we're not going to invest in helping our community and the people in our communities, and we think that we can just throw them away, we can't. And it just harms that person. They're going to be going, it's this vicious cycle, and then they're going to get reincarcerated. And then guess who has to pay for that? The taxpayers, right?
Yeah.
It affects us in that way. Now there's more crime in our communities when we could have just rehabilitated them. We could have taught them a new way of life and help our communities.
Yeah.
But instead, we put these stigmas, we put this judgment on people who've been arrested, and we want to keep them kind of in that box, and it's not right.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in building more bridges than we build walls.
Right.
And a lot of times we think of that only in terms of someone we're angry with or political issues or whatever, but it's also the people who have been incarcerated because of the choices they made. We want to build those bridges to help bring them over to the side of doing good,
right,
contributing to society.
Exactly. And 95% of people are going to be released one day. And who do you want them released as? Do you want them released as the drug dealer, the gangbanger, the thug? Or do you want them released as somebody who's rehabilitated, ready to hit the ground running and be a contributing member of society?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to your story here, Shelley. You were arrested. Just paint a brief picture about what that arrest was like, because I know that was a pivotal moment in your life.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely one of the scariest moments in my life. I'll never forget. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning, and I had been up for a couple of days. I'd finally fallen asleep. And next thing I know, my door is being kicked open, and the police are there to arrest me, yelling, "Shelley Winner, come out with your hands up." And full riot gear.
Wow.
Machine gun. Yeah. I mean, there was FBI, there was DEA, there was the local police. I'd never seen so many acronyms before. And I woke up out of my sleep and I knew this was the end for me. And everything kind of was slow motion. And I had a large amount of drugs on me, which I knew I needed to hide. So I found a little hiding spot as quickly as I could, because I was in the bedroom, in the back bedroom. So when I heard him kick down the door and come into the house, that's when I opened up the bedroom door. They grabbed me, put the handcuffs on me. They sat me down. They grabbed a chair from the kitchen, put it in the middle of the living room, sat me down, and started questioning me. And I just remember sitting there thinking, wow, I never would have thought this is where my life would be. I mean, I knew I ultimately could get in trouble for selling drugs, but that was just such a scary, eye-opening moment for me.
Was there a little bit of a feeling like you had avoided getting caught before, so you think that you can always avoid getting caught?
Oh, yeah, there was definitely that element. I mean, especially living in such a rural state, I thought to myself, oh, I can outsmart these hick cops, so to speak, for lack of better terms,
They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm the smartest woman alive. I can get away with this.
Yeah. I think that might be a common delusion.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like your critical thinking skills come into play when you're on drugs.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to emphasize. In my brief experience in doing work in prisons, I repeatedly come back to how many decisions are made because of the addiction to drugs or because they were under the influence of any substance, alcohol, drugs, or whatever.
Yep.
When your brain chemistry isn't right, you're not right.
No.
And every choice that you make is colored by that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not as an excuse, but honestly, more of a warning to say, you know what? Better stay away from these things. Better not to put yourself in a place where your thinking process is going to be compromised.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how did you view yourself in this moment? Now you've been caught. There are lots of different pathways you can take, right? You can be defiant. You can be in denial. or you can even go into depression and start beating yourself up. So what happened to you psychologically because of the arrest?
I became totally depressed. It was like in one instant, I knew that I had destroyed my life and possibly any hope for a future. And it was definitely a huge pivotal moment for me. And I thought, now what am I going to do? Because not only am I going to be spending years incarcerated, I knew I was going to be because I had been arrested by the feds. And when you get arrested by the feds, you're usually looking at a long sentence.
Yeah.
And I remember the challenges my father had trying to find employment because of his criminal record. So that for me, I knew was going to be a challenge for me as well. And just the magnitude of that itself really sent me into a depression.
And you got clean. You were forced to get clean,
I
correct?
was.
Because you were incarcerated.
Yeah, I was.
So that people understand the risks associated with that behavior. And I don't want to go into too much depth, but I do want to emphasize that. What was that process like for you? How did that feel to go through that?
I went through some of the worst withdrawals. Not only was I withdrawing from meth, but I was withdrawing from heroin. And so I was nauseous. I was ill. Every joint in my body was aching and throbbing. I couldn't sleep for days. I would toss and turn, and especially withdrawing in a dark, dingy jail cell, you just added to the intensity of that situation.
Wow. So how long was your incarceration?
I had a 4-year sentence.
Okay. And how much of that did you serve?
So I served a year and a half in prison. And then I also did a year and a half in the halfway house. So the halfway house they call it a halfway house because you're halfway to freedom. So you're still an inmate,
Okay.
but you get to work. So basically, they keep tabs on you and everything you do, but they allow you the opportunity to work. So it's a way to help us reintegrate into society.
Okay. So during that 3 years, basically, right? Year and a half in prison, year and a half halfway house. Talk to me about what you learned, or probably a better word is what you gained from that experience. Because obviously you started to do some things that were preparing you for a very successful future in sales. But we established how terrible it was. How did you start progressing from that terrible mental spot to being productive?
So after my arrest, I spent about 2 weeks in the local jail. Then they let me out into a halfway house in North Dakota. And while I was there, I was still craving drugs bad. I mean, I would have dreams about it. And I knew that I needed to get into a treatment program. And so I'd heard about this faith based treatment program called Adult and Teen Challenge. And so I applied to get into this program because I knew that I needed help to figure out how to stay sober, to deal with my demons, so to speak.
That's great.
And so got into that program, and that's where my journey of healing spiritually, mentally, physically started. It was one of the best decisions I ever made.
What's a principle that you learned from that group that you repeat in your mind, that you go back to and use as an anchor regularly in your life?
I learned in that program that I had a victim mentality.
Mm.
I learned that whatever my thoughts are, my life will become. I learned how to change my view of the world. I learned how to stop focusing and worrying about everybody else. I learned how to start loving myself. And I started to learn what peace and happiness were because of that.
That's so powerful. And if I were to sum up what I'm hearing from it, it's how you view yourself.
Hmm.
And I've seen that with other people who have been through this process of incarceration and just the thing that led up to it. You had so many different experiences growing up, and we jumped over a lot, I know, when you were young,
Hmm.
that painted that picture that you were a victim.
Right.
How did you make the progress necessary to stop viewing yourself as a victim?
By taking accountability for the things that I had done and forgiving myself for those things. I no longer wanted to be defined by my past. And I also had an experience as well where I almost got kicked out of the program. Because when I first got there, it was really hard for me. I mean, I almost got into physical altercation with the women. I hated everybody in that program. They irritated me, everything they did. And that wasn't them, that was me. Well, I almost got kicked out of the program. And I'll never forget that moment when my probation officer came to see me and she said, "What are you doing?" And I'm 6 or 7 months pregnant at this point. She says, "You're pregnant and you're here trying to get into fist fights." She says, "I'm taking you back to the local jail where you're going to finish out the remainder, while however long it takes for you to get sentenced. And as soon as you give birth to your child, I'm going to make sure you lose your parental rights because you don't deserve to be a mother." And I broke down and I cried and I begged. And I said, "Please give me another chance. Talk to the program director. See if she'll give me another chance. You won't hear a peep out of me." She went back and talked to the program director, came back and said, "All right, they're going to give you another chance." And I remember just this feeling came over me like, oh my gosh, I have a second chance. And I went up to my room and I dropped to my knees and I just asked God to change me. I told him I didn't know how to change, that I was sick and tired of dealing with this heavy weight that was on my chest, of being angry, of hating people, of having this negative view on the world. So I asked him to help me lift this from my heart. And each day as it progressed, I noticed it did feel like this huge weight was gradually lifting off my chest and like I could breathe. It was the most interesting experience. And by the time I left that program, I think it was like 3 months later, I had a loving, beautiful relationship with every one of those girls.
Man, there's so much there to unpack. I think one of the interesting things when I meet people, especially who are in that situation and they're lashing out and they're doing violent things, not necessarily physical violence, but even just the way they treat others. What they don't realize, and I think you realized, is you're doing damage to yourself. Violence towards others is really violence towards yourself.
Yeah.
Even if you're just lengthening your incarceration or you're being punished for these things because you're breaking the rules in the prison or the halfway house or whatever it is, you're just harming yourself over and over. And it sounded like you were able to break that cycle and instead turn it into showing love to other people.
Right. And I think it was that moment of surrender.
Yeah.
It was that moment of surrender where I stopped trying to control everything. And that's when the breakthrough for me happened. The shift in my mindset, the shift in my heart, the shift on my view. I was very specific that I didn't want to look at everybody in such a negative light. I didn't want to look at the world through this negative filter. And that was my ask: change my filter. So in that treatment program, they had us doing a lot of personal development and really diving into our past and how it was affecting us in the present. And we also did a lot of prayer or meditation as well. I would write out scriptures on little index cards and I would put them all over my room. And so as soon as I woke up in the morning, I would look at these scriptures, I would read them, I would speak them, I would close my eyes, I'd visualize me embodying those scriptures and, just started incorporating those types of practices into my everyday life. And then just all the personal development that we were doing within that program started to teach me a new way to think and a new way to be, which I had never done any of this type of work before. So this was all new information for me.
No one shared this with you when you were growing up. No
No,
parent figure even brought this up.
no way. No way. This was all foreign to me. And I thought, if I feel a certain way, if I'm, angry or upset and I lash out, then I'm justified because I feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
And in that program, it was teaching us that no, your emotions should not rule you. They're just emotions. And we have control over that. And if we continue to allow emotions to rule us, we will continue to have results that we don't desire, like incarceration.
Yeah. We need to stop, make choices, be more conscious about what we're doing
Exactly.
rather than just reacting
Yeah.
because we feel a certain way.
Yeah. I was just a reactor. My parents were reactors. My grandparents were reactors. I was a reactor. It's this vicious cycle that's passed down from generation to generation. And I was the first person to break this cycle because of my access to education.
Oh, that's wonderful that you did that. I mean, you're changing future generations
Yep.
with that choice. Was there any vocational training, any business skills, anything like that?
Not that much. There were a few programs in the prison, but it was like HVAC and plumbing and just not something I was very interested in. And it was also really hard to get into those programs, even if you were interested, because they only had like 10 spots for 1,000 women.
Mm.
And most of the people in those vocational programs had been there many, many, many years and had to wait to get into that program. It took them a long time. But the one thing I did have was I actually had skills with computers, not just my sales skills, obviously, but I had skills building and fixing computers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I bought my first computer when I was 23. This was before my addiction had taken over my life. Although I think it was at the age of 25 was when my addiction completely ruled me. But I did buy a computer at the age of 23, learn how to fix the computer. I was so fascinated with this technology. It was right when I think computers started to become, household items. And every time I had a problem with the computer, I would call the Microsoft support, and their way for me to fix my computer was to reinstall my operating system. And so I got tired of doing that because every time I did that, I'd lose all my files and programs and things that I had on the computer. So started doing research, learning how to fix computers. And after a while, I got pretty good at it.
So let's use that as a bridge to the next part of your story.
Yeah.
Which is you're out and you start looking for jobs. What was the first job that you got when you were released?
So the very first job I got was I was working at a tech company. I met my mentor in prison. She was a volunteer for Defy, and she hired me at her tech company.
Let's pause for a second about that. So Defy is a group that teaches people who are incarcerated how to talk about their story, how to get a job, teach a lot of skills that help people become successful. I've been involved with Defy in the past as well as Hustle 2.0. Okay, so you met this mentor.
So I met this mentor, and she said she wanted to help me when I got out. And she did. She hired me right away at her company. And so what her company did was they would go into big corporations like Twitter or LinkedIn. And then if they were going to move to a different location, I'd go in and unhook all of the computer systems, bag up all the cables and cords, get it ready for the movers. And then when they delivered it to the new location, I'd go in and reconnect everything.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was a pretty easy job, but it was with a tech company. And I believe it helped set me up to get my job at Microsoft.
Okay, so let's move on to that then. So you worked with them for a while.
Mm-hmm.
When was your first thought or opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to work for Microsoft? Where did that come from?
So I did this program while I was out called Code Tenderloin, and they actually helped me prepare a resume. They taught me how to interview. And then the other thing they did that was really, really impactful was they took us on like field trips to various tech companies. So I got to visit LinkedIn. I got to visit Twitter. I got to go to NerdWallet, Microsoft. Well, while I was at Microsoft on one of these field trips, I was at the retail store and they told me that they were hiring. And if any of us that were in the cohort were interested in applying, that we should. So I did, not thinking they were going to call me back for an interview. And within a week,
Just like, I'm going to take a chance on this. Let's see what happens.
yeah. And within a week, they called me back and I scheduled my interview. I couldn't believe it because, here I was fresh out of prison, now getting interviewed with one of the biggest tech companies in the world. I was so excited. I mean, I knew that I had to nail this interview because my life depended on it.
So what happened in that interview and what happened afterward?
So I went into the interview. I had prepped so much. I went into the interview. I did so well. She hired me right on the spot.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I'll never forget that moment. I was in a dream, right? But then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you have to do a background check, Shelley. This job offer is going to get rescinded. You better tell her.
So you didn't talk about it in the interview?
No, they can't. Legally, they can't. They can't even put it on an application. Any companies where you fill out the application, they've taken off, it's called ban the box. So they've essentially taken off that question if you've ever been incarcerated, because what was happening is nobody was getting interviews that had, previously been incarcerated. So they wanted to stop that from happening. So they took away that question altogether on applications.
I find that fascinating, though, because you're removing it from the interview process, yet the background check is still going to happen. So it's going to come up. Isn't that worse? That's like a surprise that's unpleasant.
That is what I'm saying. That is exactly what I'm saying. So what it does is it pushes the rejection process from the beginning till the end.
Yeah.
But I think what they're trying to do with that law is allow the person who is getting interviewed to let their personality shine through. And hopefully the interviewer will become an ally for that person.
Oh, that's true. That makes sense.
Yeah. But it doesn't always work like that.
But that isn't what happened in your case either. It didn't work that way.
Well, no, she was an ally for me. But the problem is she was too low on the totem pole to do anything about it. And so I told her I had just gotten out of prison. It was for a drug charge. I assured her that it was not who I am today, but I just wanted to let her know because I know the job offer is contingent on this background check passing. And she said, listen, we all make mistakes. And she was very supportive. She said, just make sure you're honest about it because they'll find out. And if you lie, you definitely won't get the job. What we'll do is if they deny it, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But just be honest. So I went back home. I got the link to do the background check. I filled it out, hit send, and said, all right, here we go.
And where did it go?
It went to Redmond, where our headquarters is. So in Washington, near Seattle. And what's really interesting is, so once you get the job offer, you start doing all the onboarding stuff because they assume you're going to pass, the background check and they want to have everything ready to go so you can just start. So as I'm filling out the paperwork, doing the background check, filling out the paperwork for like the medical and all this stuff, at the bottom of one of the emails that they sent me said, if you have a criminal record and you feel like you've been discriminated against, contact the Fair Chance Ordinance. And then it had their link to their website. So I clicked on this link and I'm like, what is this? Obviously curiosity, definitely piqued my interest.
Not thinking it's a very big deal at the moment.
I click on the link and I'm reading the criteria of this law and how to be protected by this law. And I fit all of the criteria. The company had to be in the city limits of San Francisco. The company has to have over 500 employees. The applicant has to have proof of rehabilitation. The applicant also has to have character reference letters. So it's like all these things. I was like, boom, I hit that. I was like, oh, I'm going to get this job. They have to hire me, and I became so hopeful So finally, as I'm waiting for these background check results, right, I have this little nugget of like hope. But then I start looking online, doing as much research as I could just to see if there was an article or a blog or a post or something out there saying that Microsoft hired people with criminal records, and everything pointed to no. And I'm like, okay, well, at least there's this law. Maybe I can leverage this law.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fact that they sent me that information led me to believe, obviously, they know about this law, or else they wouldn't have sent it to me. So
Sure.
when the background check results came back flagged, which I knew they would, they gave me an opportunity to explain my side of the story, which I thought, great. Here's my chance to share with them a little bit about what I did wrong, but more importantly, what I did right and why I'm amazing and why they should hire me. Oh, and then so while I was incarcerated, I did all of these various rehabilitative programs. And so I had all the certificates for those programs. And so I scanned them all to my cloud drive. And when I wrote that letter to them, I attached it to my letter so that they would know I wasn't lying about being rehabilitated and that I had put in the work to change. So that, coupled with the fact that I now know about this law, I thought I was going to get the job. And they came back and they said, no, we're not going to hire you. And I just couldn't believe it. I was blown away. Like, wait, what? What about this law?
So that was the point where you took matters into your own hands, right? And you started to push for it, or was there a step in between?
I almost didn't fight because I figured Microsoft must know about this loophole, that I don't with this law. Because why would they rescind my job offer if this law is real and I fit all of the criteria for this law? I should be protected under this law. And then why would they rescind it? So I was very confused. I just figured there was a loophole and I almost didn't even challenge them. So I was talking with my mom and she asked me if I had contacted the Fair Chance Ordinance. And I told her, no, I hadn't done that. And I wasn't sure if I was going to. And she said, well, you've got to at least try. So I did. I called and spoke with the lady there. Really, really wonderful person. And she asked me what company had discriminated against me. And when I told her, she said, we've never fought a company this big before.
Yeah, that's a huge company, Microsoft.
Yeah. She said, we may not win. We are just a small ordinance in San Francisco. And if they don't comply, they will be fined, but they don't have to. She said the biggest company that they'd ever fought was Foot Locker. And she said, just be prepared for a fight. I'm not saying that I won't fight for you, but just be prepared.
Might not work out.
It might not work out. And I said, okay. And at this point, I knew if I didn't challenge them, that I would always be left with what if. And I didn't want to live with that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel that way, where they wonder, should I make an attempt? Not realizing that if you don't make the attempt, you're going to regret it. You're going to think about it. If it doesn't work out and you tried, you can still feel good about things, but make the attempt.
Exactly. And I was tired of letting fear run my life, and always staying inside my comfort zone. And I wasn't getting any results. I wasn't becoming the person I wanted to be with that type of a mindset.
That sounds almost like a callback to the things that you were learning in rehabilitation.
Right.
Of allowing that fear, because that's what drives a lot of this, right? The fear of what people have done to you, fear of what they might do. So I just want to make that connection there, that what you went through in your training, I believe, set you up for making a run at challenging Microsoft through this law.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question about it. In fact, it was the programming in Defy Ventures that taught me about fear. Because when I had to do that pitch competition, I did not want to do it. I'd never spoken publicly before, and I wanted to back out every ounce of me. And
Can you explain what you mean by that with the pitch competition? What was the pitch competition with Defy?
so the whole program is an entrepreneurship and leadership training program. And so we had to come up with a business idea. And at the very end, for our graduation, we had to give our pitches, our business pitches. And so all of these executives and CEOs from various companies came in and they volunteered to be the judges for this competition. And I'd never spoken in front of people before. And I was a nervous wreck. I was sick to my stomach and I was going to fake being sick, like really sick to where I couldn't pitch. And the day before, Catherine Hoke had sent in a video for us to watch. And she encouraged us to stick with it, that we had worked so hard. And if we don't do this pitch, we will regret it. And to not let fear hold us back anymore. That we were living these lives where we always let fear rule us. And she said, nobody is there to judge you. Everybody is supportive and loving and wants to see you succeed. So get up there and just do your best. Even if you make a mistake, who cares? And when I heard those words, it was like, that's exactly what I needed to hear at that moment in my life. And so when I got up on that stage, I wanted to puke, but I did it. And you know what? I won. I won the competition and I never would have thought I would win. And that was a huge defining moment for me where I really saw the strength that I had within myself.
Yes. And then now you had something that was much higher stakes.
Yeah.
Challenging Microsoft.
Right.
And you could say, I faced my fear before, and I can do it again.
I can do it again. Exactly.
Yeah.
Look at the results that were produced, right?
Yeah. So I know that that was a long process to get that through. Can you summarize what the path was and what the end result was of challenging Microsoft?
The path was a roller coaster ride of emotions. The path that I was on had a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of self-limiting thoughts. And I still struggled with my self-limiting beliefs. I think we always will, right? But those came into play. And I even thought for a moment that even if I won, I'm going to be retaliated against. People are going to treat me different. You know, all of those fears came into play, but I knew that those were just fears and that I was going to not listen to them. I was not going to allow them to rule my life. And the moment that I found out that they were going to give me the second chance, it was one of the greatest moments of my life. I knew that this was going to completely change the trajectory of my life. And that not only would my life be better, but now I could provide a life for my son that I never thought possible. And I knew if I got my foot in the door in the retail store, I'd work really, really hard and work my way up into corporate. And I was able to do that within a year and a half.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to highlight something you just said, because I know that you're an advocate, like I am, for people who have been incarcerated to be given a chance in the workplace. What people do not understand is what you just illustrated. When somebody has done the work, they are hungry.
Yep.
They are appreciative, and they make the most of the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every company wants employees like that. They wish they had people who were so driven to change things that they were willing to work harder than other people would work. It's part of the reason why I love going to these events, because they're hungry to listen to what I'm sharing as a coach.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about that in your experience and also what you've seen with others?
Yeah. I mean, I know people can change. They just have to be given access to rehabilitative education or programs. And sky's the limit. You know, adversity creates character. And people who have been incarcerated have gone through a lot of adversity. And a lot of times it's like when we're sitting in the jail, in prison, thinking about the things that we did wrong and just wanting a chance to move on from that. And then when you couple it, you know, you have access to rehabilitative programs, And you get to change your entire thought process and your mindset and your filter on this world. And then you exit prison, like I did, a better person than when you were incarcerated, and because of that adversity, right, that we had, it creates this desire, this passion to want to exceed, to want to excel, to show society that, I deserve this chance to be a contributing member of society. I am an asset to this community. I am an asset to the world. I am an asset to any employer if they'll just give me this second chance. And so when I started working at Microsoft, my whole perspective was completely different from everybody else because of my incarceration.
Yeah. But also because of the work you did during your
Of
incarceration.
course.
Because not everyone does that work, Shelley, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But you used that as a springboard, as an opportunity to change everything that had happened in the past.
Yep.
And make yourself so much better and so much more useful to the world.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the Gold Club. Being a top sales executive from Microsoft, that is remarkable for such a large company. What did you do that created that outcome for you?
I got lots of mentors, and I hired a sales coach and a lot of sales training courses. It wasn't easy at first. I had a lot of struggles. And at one point, I really thought that I might get fired because I didn't originally start in like a B2B sales role, but I was moved into the B2B sales role after 3 months after I made it into corporate. And so it was like sink or swim at that point, and I had to figure it out, and definitely struggled. Then COVID hit. So it was like one thing after another, and I knew I needed to up my game and my skills. And so I reached out to the top salespeople at Microsoft and met with them on a weekly basis. 4 different sales guys. And they started training me. Then I hired a guy on my own. I was doing as many sales training programs as I could. And eventually my skills started building and I became more confident, because the problem I was facing as well was I was comparing myself to everybody. I really was struggling with imposter syndrome. And here I am with some of the best and brightest minds, right? The most successful people. Most of my colleagues have bachelor's or master's degrees. So I struggled with that a little bit. But then I started to realize that that stinking thinking was not doing me any justice. And I needed to do what I needed to do to push that aside and get me focused on what can I do to do well in this job, because I know I can. And once I stopped, listening to that fear and those self-limiting beliefs, I was able to spread my wings and really start enjoying my job. And it was just like that whole shift in my spirit, my mindset. Boom, I was getting deal after deal after deal. I mean, I hit 412% to my quota.
Wow.
Yeah. And, my quota was $17 million.
I'm a systems guy, Shelley. I like processes.
Yeah.
So give us just a little bit of a hint into your process. I understand the mindset and I appreciate it and how important it is, but you still got to get in front of people. You still got to have the opportunity to have the conversation. So can you give us a little bit of an insight into the secret of your success with B2B sales, which for those who are unfamiliar, that's business to business. So Microsoft to another business. What's your secret to that?
Being a good storyteller.
Okay. How do you tell the story about a laptop, though? It's a computer. What's the story here?
You tell that story of, we're a software company. Why'd we get into the hardware game? Why'd we start making computers? And I tell that entire story from start to finish. I show a map of surface of when we started. I talk about how we were the first 2-in-1 tablet that had a Windows operating system. And I show them our journey over the years and all the various devices we've created. I talk about the fact that the only other OEM that owns the entire stack from the chip to the cloud is Apple. And because we own the entire stack, our hardware works great with our software and vice versa. Right. And I love telling this story. I love evangelizing Surface. I mean, they're beautiful devices. They work very, very well. I've sold to some of the world's largest companies. And, I have customers that have their entire company standardized on our laptops. And I just go in, I tell the story, I tell why we're so amazing. And I listen to their pain points as well. You got to hear the customer out and figure out how my devices will help them with their pain points.
That's really interesting. And I hope that people recognize that that's not just a principle of success in sales, but in all sorts of things, learning how to tell stories.
Yeah.
You'll be happy to know when I travel, I do have a Surface laptop studio. So
Yay!
I'm in the family. I feel like we could have this conversation for a very long time, and you have so much to offer. Thank you for sharing this with us.
Yeah.
Can you talk just a little bit? You mentioned your son. What do you do to make sure that you're spending time with the key relationships in your life?
So I have him over on the weekends as often as I can. I do work around his schedule, my mother's schedule, but for the most part, always try to have him at least 1 weekend a month, if not two. And then I plan trips where I go and spend the day with him. We'll go to the park or we'll go to the zoo. We'll go to like a bounce house, a trampoline park, things like that. So it's always fun hanging out with him. I get to live vicariously through him.
That's great.
Yeah.
Are you married?
Yes, I am.
I met him at the event,
You
right?
did?
In
Yeah.
California.
Yep.
Yeah. How do you two work together to make sure that you're maintaining that relationship and building that with each other?
We have date night every weekend. We like to go out to eat. We're both foodies. So I think it's really important to have that time, to spend with your spouse, whether it's relaxing, watching a movie, going out on a date. But yeah, every week we do something.
Yeah, I love that. And in my coaching with successful leaders, I'm shocked at how often people aren't taking time in their week for the key relationships, whether that's a date or whether that's, going and visiting your parents or whatever it is. I feel like making that commitment to a weekly time is so critical. So I'm glad you brought up that example. It seems like a small thing, but it really isn't.
Yeah,
It's quite important, quite unusual.
I agree. And it just so happens that he's also a restorative justice advocate as well. So
Oh, that's nice.
spending time, for us volunteering in the prisons is heaven for us. It's a good bonding experience as well.
And I just want to highlight that you also have the website winnercircleus.com,
Yep.
which is that program that you're creating to help other people in a similar way that you found a path in sales, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic skill that is not talked about very much for people who are incarcerated. And boy, it should be, because there are a lot of really great salespeople who found their way into prison. And if they reapply that skill,
right,
they can be a great asset to companies.
It's a huge untapped talent pool. And my program's going to be producing rehabilitated rock star salespeople.
Like yourself.
Yeah, like myself.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Companies need the best employees, not just the best employees without a criminal record.
That's a great way to put that.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the part at the end where we talk about action. I'm a big believer that for people who are listening to this, it's not so much about your story, even though it's a wonderful story. It's not so much about the principles. It's about what they do with it. We need to take action and follow your example. And so if someone listening to this can do one thing this week, they'll make your success story a part of their success story. So what I'm going to do, Shelley, I'm going to suggest 3 possible tactical actions, like something they can do right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd like you to add an action that is an option. So the first is view people as they can become. When you meet someone that maybe is different than you or has been through struggles, or in Shelley's case, drug addiction, all these terrible things, thank goodness you had people who looked at you as who you could become, not who you were in the past. And I think there are so many people in our lives that It's too easy to judge. And instead, what we should do is imagine a future where they're their best self, and that will change every interaction that we have with them. So perhaps you can think about someone in your life that needs you to look at them in that way. Second action that I would say is don't allow your emotions to rule you, especially fear. There are probably things that you are thinking that you might attempt or might give it a try, and you're allowing fear, you're allowing negative things that happen in your past to hold you back from doing that. Make the attempt. And even if it doesn't work out, at least you know that you tried and you made that attempt. But my guess is if you try something that's difficult, odds are it's probably going to turn out that fear isn't really founded. And then the last one, when I created this show, the goal was to look for universal principles that would help my family succeed, in particular my children. You brought up storytelling. It's not the first time I've heard it with interviews. A lot of the people that I've worked with talk about the power of the story. So I want to highlight that as a principle. For someone listening to this, think about what you're doing. Think about what you're selling, whatever you're making, what you're doing in your career, and say, what's the story here? How can I tell this story to others? How can I create my own story? And if you start looking at your job in terms of telling a story, I think opportunities will start to present themselves that you didn't notice. Shelley, what's one action that you would add to those suggested actions?
One action I would add is if you have entry-level sales roles within your organization and you do the hiring, to consider applicants that have a criminal record and to partner with Winner Circle to interview our graduates upon release. And I'm not asking companies to lower the bar by any means. I'm asking companies to lower the barrier.
Oh, that's a great phrase. Don't lower the bar, lower the barrier.
Yep.
Because there's an awesome talent pool out there
that
you might not be looking at.
Exactly.
Thank you for being an example of that, Shelley. Thank you for being an advocate for that. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you and interview you. Thanks for your generosity and sharing your story.
Yes, thank you for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. Remember, it's not so much about what you heard, but it's about what you do. So make sure that you do something and make Shelley's success story a part of your success story. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Show, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Research and assistant production by Victoria Budez. Sound editing by Mark Lamorjazy. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 Licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you have a suggestion for someone my dad might like to interview, please send it to guest@davecrenshaw.com. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.